One. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Paramystic Christina. I'm so glad that you're with me today. I have a very special guest, Markus Kasunich. Uh, his list of credentials is so long, I'm just going to let him tell you about it. I know you're a healer, you're a therapist of sorts, you have all kinds of cool stuff going on.
Thanks for first of all, thanks for having me here. I love our conversation, so I'm
Me
glad that
too.
we're doing this. It's great. Yeah, I've been doing this kind of work for 24, 25 plus years. There's healing, I'm a life coach. I've done a lot of yogic stuff, so deep and profound meditation back and forth to India for many years, been studying that for about 25 years and practicing. Written a couple books, I have a relationship subscription site where I put all my content. But it's kind of hard when you've been doing it for so long, like we've been doing it for, because they're
Right,
like what do you call you? And like
right,
so the easiest thing I think the easiest thing anyone ends up calling me is a holistic life consciousness and relationship coach. That's secularly acceptable for most people.
right.
But yeah, I've spent most of my life doing this, living on the outskirts of the mystical and the non-conventional. So you kind of, as you're doing that and you're gathering tools to learn, you learn. And I mean,
Right,
I always call myself the reluctant shaman because this was not a planned path, right? This is something, it's
right.
more of a calling than a path,
Oh, it's
than a
definitely a
choice.
calling. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely a calling. And that's the thing. I've seen different things, memes, quotes, whatever about, you got your calling, but other people don't have to understand because it wasn't a conference call. Right.
It's funny.
Right. It wasn't a conference call. You got your calling. I got my calling. People get
Yeah.
callings, and you know it's a calling because it just takes over your life.
Yeah,
It
it's
just
I always
takes
call it
over.
I
Yeah.
call it the choiceless choice,
Mm-hmm.
like you someone's like, "Well, do you have a choice?" And I'm like, I if I choose something else, like for a year or two I opted out of trying to do any of this kind of work, and it did not go well because I
Right.
wasn't in alignment with what was within me. And so at some point I just, instead of fighting it, I just surrendered to it and said, this is going to be what it is. And so I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
lean into that, and I don't really have a choice anyways, because regardless of how I live my life, consciousness, spirit, energy, the consciousness who you are is going to come through. And
Right.
it is what it is. Having lived in an ashram for 11 years and studied with enlightened masters and a lot of yogic training, that doesn't go away. You can't just decide, I'm not going to do that anymore. It becomes
Right.
integrated as who you are. So that's
Absolutely.
a difference between someone who's taking a weekend course, which is lovely and powerful,
Right.
for someone who's curious. But it wasn't a curiosity for me; it was an awakening, and then I had to learn how to deal with it.
Yeah.
So
And I
that's
don't know
different.
about you, but I have had several awakenings throughout this
Yeah,
journey. It's not one awakening and it's like, oh, doesn't work
no.
that way. There are several awakenings as we're walking along this path. And
Oh
um,
yeah,
yeah, and
it's an
when
ongoing process of unfolding, right?
it absolutely is. It's not a one and done for sure, and it's amazing to me how many people are like, well, I already did that. But are
Yeah.
you still doing it? Because it's not something you do once, you know? Consciousness is not something that you achieve once and then you're there. It just doesn't work that way.
No, it's like this. I always describe it for people like a spiral. And
Hmm.
when you do your first ring of the spiral, there's a level of opening and awakening and awareness that becomes revealed. And then you go into the next ring and the next ring. And that's an infinite spiral into consciousness. And as long as you're in a human body and you're living in this corporeal form, you're going to be doing a very specific kind of evolution. Whether you're involved with that or not is really up to you. But the process is unraveling you regardless. So you might as
Exactly.
well, I always say, instead of getting dragged by the horse, you might as well ride the horse because it's happening anyways. And the question is not really whether it's happening. The question is, what's your relationship to that process? And are you involved in it in a conscious and an intimate way? And a lot of people who aren't, then life happens to them. And I always say, instead of looking at life happening to you, life is happening through you.
Right.
So you're in a constant state of evolution. I mean, that's the natural state of the human evolutional process here, or else we wouldn't be here. I mean,
Absolutely.
we
Absolutely.
chose this plane for a reason on some level.
Yeah, I sometimes question that choice.
Not necessarily. Well, I mean, we were starting this conversation. I
Yeah,
mean, in the description of ancient scriptures, Earth is considered not a high on the tiers of the evolved states of consciousness.
right,
That doesn't mean that there's not good things for us here to learn,
right,
but there's the lower astral below us, and then Earth just kind of resides right above that. And then the higher realms. There's more higher realms above and beyond us than there are so we live in this very interesting realm of consciousness, which
right.
has its benefits, of course, and there's a reason for us being here, but it's not the highest tier on the ladder.
Oh, definitely not. Definitely not. I know you and I are both in contact with beings who are in much higher realms than Earth realm. And we were talking about this before, and when I first asked you to come on the show, we were going to talk about, paranormal and mystical. That's where paramystic comes from,
I
right?
love that.
So, yeah, thank you to whatever part of the universe gave me that. That was beautiful. But that also plays into this because as all these realms are opening up, all these doors are opening up for us, right? There where there's fewer filters. We're seeing all of this darkness rise to the surface. That also opens doors to other realms, and that includes paranormal realms, right?
Absolutely. And I mean, I love the name paranormal because I mean, that's a Greek word that means like in contrary to convention or beyond.
Right.
And the whole idea of the word mystic is like hidden. That's
Mhm.
essentially that's a Greek word that means hidden or closed off. So I mean, you have this thing where you're saying, listen, para mystic is now open. And
Right.
I mean, and this has been talked about for thousands and thousands of years, and the mystical traditions exist in every single religion across the
Yes.
board. The mystic is the union with the absolute and the infinite, right? So
Hmm.
it's beyond seeing beyond the conventional norm and then being able to open to this entire spectrum of the universe that most people don't necessarily, well, more people are now, but most people don't necessarily believe or know or have a direct experience of.
Right.
But we're in this place, and I mean, we were talking about this, but we were talking about the Mahabharata and the whole idea of some of the Indian scripts, which I'm kind of a mad scientist about reading ancient scripts, the
Good for
Sumerian
you.
tablets.
Yeah.
Well, it's
Good
the
for you. Then
oldest.
you can share it with us.
It's some of the oldest material we have on the planet, that
Right.
like some of the oldest languages with some of the oldest stories that are taking place 10,000, 12,000 years ago. And in these stories, Mahabharata being one of them, they talk about the Kali Yuga, which is this age where the veil between everything, the human being is it's kind of this weird place because it's the dark, it's called the Dark Ages, where all of our open ability to the different realms has been diminished, but now we're in this place where things start to open up again.
Hmm.
And so there's these phases where things are starting to open up. And I really feel like in the astrologically in the age of Aquarius, and again, people are like, oh, the age of Aquarius. But I mean, if you really think about the astrological changes, there's like 5 or 6 planets that have completely shifted houses in the whole field of astrology. That is going to create a complete mix up of everything. It just is, right? People are, I
Absolutely.
mean, the influence, and there's every single culture beyond before ours has had a profound relationship with the cosmos. We are the least aware of our cosmic relationship than any culture that's ever been on the planet before. So,
Agreed.
but and at the same time that we see all this corruption evolve, and that's the thing. One of the flavors of the Kali Yuga is corruption becomes open. Everything becomes open. It stopped being hidden, which is the age of Aquarius. All the hidden things, whether that be the contractive or expansion, everything's coming to the surface. So we now have a new game in town to a certain
Right.
degree, right? I mean, and Paramistic is not non-conventional, and it wasn't non-conventional in most cultures. In
No.
most cultures, it was integrated into the way that we functioned as in our relationship to the earth, the cosmos, ourselves, the other realms. This is all
Hmm.
opening up.
Yeah.
So I love the term paramystic because you're saying, listen, it's now the beyond is here. It's open.
Yes. Yes.
And let's talk about it. Let's talk about what's going on and the things that are happening and open this up so people can kind of awaken that we're far more multidimensional beings than we give ourselves credit for.
Absolutely, we are. I completely agree. And with you talk about all the corruption and everything coming to the surface. I literally don't know how it could be more obvious than it is, and people are still missing it.
But you know, but I've had this
Yeah.
conversation as a coach working with people, individuals in terms of
Hmm.
their growth process. And you ask, I often will say to people, because people get very, very hopeless. It's easy to get hopeless in an age like this.
Yeah, it is.
And I'll say, think about how much discomfort you required as an individual who was on the path, who had had levels of awakening. How uncomfortable do you have to get to inspire you to change? Now you have to look at that from a collective perspective. How much discomfort, contraction, corruption has to be projected and kind of bombarded into the human experience for people to have to go inward to change something different, right? It's
Right.
it's going to get the age of Aquarius is not rainbows and unicorns, not right away. It
No.
require it's gonna there's got to be a rub where we're gonna get into the you've got to get into the shadow. We've got to unearth all of these things, and
Hmm.
we have to have a develop a relationship with that shadow part of the human condition in a way that allows us to be able to integrate it, because right now it's disassociated from most of the human experience. We don't want to even look at our shadow. We don't want to deal with the darker stuff that's going on. So what do we have to have? We have to have it projected at like 11 on the dial or higher, in order for
Yeah.
us to be able to, especially an unaware, uninterested individual, they have to be really, really uncomfortable. So if that's a
Right.
collective thing, it's going to have to get really intense. And that's what it's going to require for there to be the kind of awakenings that is part of the natural evolution. You
Right.
know, it's,
Right.
it's unfortunate.
It is. It's unfortunate, but we're a thick lot, so so here we are having to deal with it, and the thing is like if we take your analogy of what does it take for a single individual to wake up, and then we
Right.
look at it societally. Okay, well, let's look at society as one individual, and we're all different cells, right?
It's an organism, right?
It's an organism,
The human
right?
organism.
So we are different cells in that organism, and some of the cells are going to wake up faster than others, and some
Mhm.
of the cells are going to die off, and some of the cells are going to change shape, and some of the cells are going to shrivel, and so I mean, and that's what we're seeing happening in society, and it's not just America,
Oh no,
you
it's the
know,
entire human
it's the
culture.
entire human species
Yeah.
basically that's going through this all at once. And astrologically, I had read, well, it wasn't very long ago, about the last time that I don't know if it was like Pluto went into retrograde or something,
Right.
where we had the Renaissance. Well, what led up to the Renaissance? You're right, not unicorns and rainbows.
No.
No, there
Death
was
and destruction and
revolutions.
plagues and revolutions and like it was ruthless in terms of
Yes,
like what had to be experienced in order to crack the code.
right,
And so people are like, that terrifies me. I'm like, but this is the kind of double-edged sword of the age we're living in, with that much outward cognitive dissonance that's being
right,
projected in the messaging and all the corruption and all the darkness, right? That just forces people to go deeper inward if you
right.
take that invitation. Because you
Yes.
could also take the invitation to go into your reptilian brain, the reactive part, the
Hmm.
instinctual part, and then live in that state of fight, flight, or freeze, which is what most people are living in.
Right.
So we have the choice to do that. And that's kind of an unawakened state. You'll go into that and you'll live in that survival mode, which anyone in survival mode is easily manipulated.
Right.
Like
Because they're in
if you're
fear.
emotionally
Yeah.
compromised, you're deep in fear, you're easily manipulated. You can be moved around the board. But someone who awakens, who cracks you open and you awaken, that gives you powerful incentive to go inward. And
Yes,
that's what the beauty of these ages are. They said that more enlightened beings can be awakened during the age of Kali Luga because the darkness is so obtuse that it forces people to go inward in a different way and access their own inherent divinity. And
exactly.
if you look at it from that perspective, then that's what's required. And
Right.
everyone's like, well, how do you know that's required? I'm like, that's because what we have. Of course, if what we have demonstrates what we need, we have what we need going on right now.
Right. Exactly.
It's just a
Exactly.
matter of how we relate to it, right? And a lot of people want to relate to that by, if you want to relate to that by getting lost in that whole survival thing, it's going to be very difficult to. It's going to require a lot more to crack you open. And I mean, and regardless, I mean, like my first kind of awakening happened through a near death experience, and
Hmm.
and it was not an easy experience. Everyone wants to romanticize that kind of opening. For me, when I came back into this form after having had an experience of something else, first of all, you can't relate to the world ever the same way ever again,
Never.
because now that you've had an experience of something else and you come back in, you're like, now you're finished, you're done, you can't see it the way your innocence is gone to a certain degree.
Right.
In Sanskrit they say you can't unring the bell, right? The bell's
Yes.
been rung and it's done.
That's
Now what I
it.
mean by
Yeah.
it's done, it's that you have an awareness that this is not what it is, there's more.
Mm.
And then from that perspective, it was nothing but trying to figure out how to function in a very fluid reality where you're open to a lot of things that people don't even know exist. That
Hmm.
was a challenge. That was not an easy thing as for 11-year-old.
Yeah,
And
and you're
so
describing my life, so thank you. Yeah, right, because I've been there
you know
too.
exactly what I'm
The,
talking about.
getting to that new death experience was a horrible thing,
Yeah.
but
And
the
everyone
information that we bring back, yeah.
and what's required of you to function differently now that you have more information available to you,
Hmm.
right? I mean, you can't function the same way that you functioned before, not without a lot of pain.
Right.
It's not going to work. So when you have that open, and that's what a spiritual experience does, it gives you access to something. You have an experience and you touch something else, and then you come back and you have to now integrate that into our world. So
Right.
when people romanticize the awakening experience, like you said, it's not just one awakening. For some
No.
people it is. It can be a giant awakening, but then there's integration. It took
Right.
me 15 years plus to integrate an experience of having that experience. And then from there, all the other things that had to awaken as a part of that process.
Right.
And so you're on that journey. When you get in that road and you're spinning in that and you're in that, there's no
Hmm.
getting out of it. You could
Right.
pretend like you're out of it, but you're now in the game, whether
Yeah.
you like it or
Yeah.
not.
That first experience, that first opening experience, often holds a bigger space, right? But then
True.
you
Yeah,
have more awakening experiences that aren't as big, aren't as profound, maybe, but it's never just one in my experience.
I agree.
There's always more and more and more openings and more awakenings, but it's just like anything else. Once you've done it a few times, you kind of develop an understanding of what's happening. So it's not like this big boom like it was the first time, because the first time we didn't have the understanding.
There's nothing.
There was
Then you had to
nothing.
go glean all the understanding. And for us,
Yes,
there was no internet to do that. We were doing that through
right.
mentors and traveling and trying to be with beings or people who had experiences like that who could help you understand the perspective that you now viewed reality from.
And I know both of us, we were children when we had
Yeah,
our
we were
first
young.
experiences. And it's my, did you lived in kind of a rural area too, right?
Yeah,
At that time?
I grew up in like a small town in Canada. Yeah.
Right. I grew up in a small town in Wisconsin. So, you know, where do you find those mentors when you're a child and you've had this big awakening um, due to a near-death experience? Which, first of all, how do you even explain that to somebody when you're a kid and you don't have you don't have the verbiage, you don't have the language for what's happened to you, you know? And how do you tell people about that? And how do you find somebody who can mentor you, because who takes kids seriously?
True. I mean, I went to a psychiatrist at a very young age, and I was
Hmm.
told I was schizophrenic and that they wanted to put me on like copious doses of lithium. And I was like, no, I know that something's going on with me, but I know that I'm not what you're saying. I just
Right.
intuitively knew that. And so
Hmm.
for me, I was sitting in the office of this individual. And so I was, like in my mid-teens. And I was like, okay, well, if he's going to diagnose me with being crazy and they're going to put me into an institution, then I better at least learn why he's making that diagnosis. So I copied all the books. He went out for the moment. I started writing down all the books in his on his bookshelf, and then that kind of drove me into studying psychology. And then once I had enough understanding of psychology, I was like, I'm not that. I'm not
Hmm.
what and then another diagnosis they gave me was manic depressive. But when you're viewing things from different experiences and hearing things and seeing things that other people don't see, then the natural thing for people to say is you're crazy because you don't live in convention. I
Right.
mean, there are a lot of people in institutions that are not crazy.
Right.
They are
Because
just, their
they're walking
consciousness is just
between
open.
worlds.
They're
Yeah.
walking between worlds. And
Yeah.
there's very few places in our culture, in this specific modern culture, the Western culture, that
Hmm.
have an appreciation or a place to receive that in a way with an open, receptive way of viewing it.
Yeah.
And then you end up with a lot of people who are having mystical experiences, right? End up
Hmm.
in situations where they're being drugged, they're being subdued, and they're being pulled out of society and put into a place because it threatens the superficial convention.
And can I toss in another aspect here? Okay.
Please.
So for me, I grew up in a family that was heavy in addiction.
Mm,
It was very violent. It was an ugly place for a kid to be. And
especially someone who's opened.
yeah, well, I got opened because of it.
Okay.
Okay.
Which is often the case, right?
Which is often the case. So then I start seeing into other realms, and I'd already been having prophetic dreams before that. And I medicated myself because all I got was straighten up and fly right.
Yeah.
Well, there was nobody in my life that was straight and flying right. So, you know, there was no, I didn't even have an example to follow for that. So then I start self-medicating, which led to addiction, which led to another near-death experience and another opening and awakening. And, it's like when you're going through these processes, who do you find to mentor that? Who do you find who understands as a child what's happening and that you're not crazy, but you're walking between worlds and you can see all of it? And I know that there are other people who have experienced this because every time I speak about this, somebody contacts me and says, "Oh my God, you told my story."
Right.
You know?
And that is it's unfortunately it's an all too common experience
Mm-hmm.
living in an age that doesn't want to acknowledge the multidimensional experience of the human condition. I
Right.
mean, this one of the things that in these scriptures that's fascinating to me is that they do not refer to Earth as a globe or a world. They refer to it as a realm,
It's a realm.
and there are
Yes.
multiple realms. And in the ancient traditions,
Mm-hmm.
especially in the Mahabharata and the Ramayana and these very ancient books, which are some of the most ancient texts we have available to us, the realms were open, and there was an understanding that there was a connection between realms, and that beings from different realms were transversing between these places, and human beings could, if they were invited into some of these celestial realms, they could access them. But in order to do that, you had to have a high level of purification, that you're purified enough of your consciousness where you would be at a vibration that you could actually engage with these other realities.
Right.
So,
Right.
a lot of people are like, well, I want to travel to different realms. And I'm like, first of all, I don't necessarily see it that way from my perspective. I don't feel like you travel anywhere. I feel like you're connecting to the part of you that's already in the other realm. Because if you're
Thank
a
you.
multidimensional being
Thank
and
you.
you
Yes.
live on all realms, you're not going somewhere. You're connecting to the part of you that exists within that realm that you haven't had access to,
Right.
right? And
Right.
so, and that is not going outward, that's going inward. Like the entire, I mean, in the yogic tradition, the spinal energy, they call it the shushumna, which is
Yes.
the central point of the kundalini energy. That shushumna is neither masculine nor feminine. It's kind of this empty absolute energy that is neither, it's neither feminine or masculine, but it's both. And it's the entry point and they consider the spine, this energy in the spine, the entry point is the interface between worlds. So everything is an inward journey.
Hmm.
Everything is an inward journey,
Everything
right?
is. And let's go back to some other societies that didn't have written texts, right?
Mm,
So there are tribal societies from all over the world that
yeah,
also had contact with other realms. And it was a very natural part of life. It was a
absolutely.
very natural part of life. They didn't write everything down. If they had a written language, it was put onto stones and walls and whatever, but it was not necessarily text. However, the oral traditions passed down and somehow managed to survive all of the, what do you call it? You called it a Kali Yuga.
The Kali Luga,
Kali Yuga. Okay.
the Dark Ages.
The Dark Ages, but they have managed to survive all of those
Yeah,
as well as an oral tradition passed down. So there is definitely something more to the consciousness that goes well beyond human, where we can still access those things even if we don't have something to read that tells us, even if we don't have, you know, podcasts to
Sanskrit or
tell
Sumerian
us.
text, right?
Yes,
Well, I mean,
exactly.
I come from a native tradition. My father was raised on a reservation, and my great grandfather was the medicine man of the tribe, the Bear Clan in northern Ontario, Canada.
Hmm.
And the traditions speak openly about the star people, the people from
Yes.
under the earth, the people from other dimensions, the
Hmm.
very and then even the story of Buffalo Catholic woman who
Yes.
had come into the tribe and taught ceremony and taught different ways to connect in a sacred way and taught human beings
Yes.
to access. I mean, if you just listen to some of these oral traditions, you're right. It's passed down. The knowledge is there, and
Hmm.
it's woven in it. But what happened in our culture? It's become myth, right? This whole idea of myth, but myth, there's always something to myth. Like there's, the basis of myth is usually an experience that's now been kind of transformed into this fable. But there's usually some form of truth. And if you see these fables show up in different cultures all over the world that collaborate the ideas that we're talking about, don't you think that we should at least consider the possibility
Right.
that there's a lot of different information coming from a lot of different sources? Why are we discrediting an entire culture of information just because it's woven in story and myth? Well,
Right.
that's maybe the only way that in this dark age that we can even receive it.
Exactly. It's so much easier to receive a story than it is to receive a lesson plan.
Well, I mean, it works that way in the human
Yeah.
condition too. There's a
Yeah,
lot of times when
absolutely.
I'm working with somebody, and in order for someone to understand so that they don't feel confronted when you're working
Hmm.
directly with one of their conditions or one of the neurosis that they have going on, you have to kind of share a story, which is a metaphor or an allegory about what's going on so that it's not so confronting for the ego. So if you
Right.
think about a cultural ego, of course, the stories and the mythology and the mythos and the archetypes that we have are woven probably in deep, deep truth about the
Hmm.
nature of the universe. And the only way we're able to receive it in the unconscious state is to receive it through that way, where it doesn't become so confronting to our superficial understanding of reality.
Right.
Right. So it
Right.
forces, I mean, so those are like, I think, other soft ways to deliver the message.
Hmm.
And listen, the Hopis have an first of all, the Hopi language. I just moved here to Arizona, and I mean, I am completely fascinated with the Hopis because their language is super sophisticated. First of all, it's glyphs, which is very similar to Egyptian or Sanskrit. And
Right.
those languages, like the glyph, the languages of Asian languages are conceptual languages. Like symbols hold multiple layers of meaning when you look at them. And the Hopis have like thousands of glyphs of hieroglyphs that are not that much different than Egyptian
Hmm.
hieroglyphs. And their calendars, the Hopi calendar with all the predictions, because they have intense predictions about the very similar thing that the Indian culture is talking about in Sanskrit, which is this age of Kali Yuga, which is this age where things are shifting and changing, and there's this
Hmm.
chaos as we're opening up all the worlds. And
Right.
so, I mean, your presentation opening this up to the secular world is part of the way that people are starting to access this and get the understanding we are far more than we consider ourselves to be. We are
Yes.
biological beings, but that's just the basis. There's so much more going on.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I kind of look at like, on a very simplistic level, we are infinite beings and we currently are inside of these vehicles. And at some point it's time to trade in. You know? It's,
That's funny.
so we better have some idea of how we're going to do that, as far as like what is beyond, how do we grasp onto other realms? How do we connect with the other realms that we already are in? How do we understand that our souls are way too big to fit in one body? you know and
Absolutely.
that is the thing that a lot of people don't understand, because we get really, this world, this 3D world that we live in is very convincing. It's a very
It's seductive.
convincing
It's
illusion.
seductive.
Yeah,
It's a seductive illusion,
it
right?
is a very seductive illusion,
Yeah.
right? So then we create all of these things around us, and I think that a lot of people don't take into consideration, or maybe even never thought about, everything that's around you right now was an inspiration from somewhere, right? This
Yeah.
computer screen, this microphone, the shirt I'm wearing, the glasses I have on my face. All of these things were concepts that came from somewhere else, that came from our imaginations, that came from our connection to other realms, that came from somewhere. But it all feels very seductive when it's in front of you.
It is a very convincing illusion. And
Yeah.
in the ancient cultures, it's called Maya,
Hmm.
which is the grand illusion, and it is magical. It's considered a
Yes.
magical illusion. I mean, the modern version of that is we're
Yeah.
living in a simulation,
Right.
right? Multidimensional reality. Quantum physics talks about it from a multidimensional reality of
Hmm.
and what it is. But I mean, yogically, it's the world of mind, which
Yeah.
is exactly what you're saying. It's
Yes.
the imaginate, it's the faculty of mind that's filtering consciousness into this very convincing forum that we get to play in, and then we become completely seduced by the illusionary forum that we created,
Right. And
right?
sometimes we forget that we're playing and then we get mad.
Always.
And then we get angry because it
We
isn't
get
working
angry,
the way we thought it should work. But
right?
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's and that's seductive. Listen, the illusion is very seductive,
Mhm.
and that's the thing with this sensory oriented biological aspect of us that is enticing.
Mhm.
And I mean, this is spoken about in texts, yogic texts, and the teachers I've worked with and the gurus and the mystics have talked about the seduction of the sensory, the faculty of the human condition, because it's
Yeah.
so enticing to because the senses, we began lost in the senses, which why so many practices that we had to partake in were about the being able to have restraint from your ability to from your desires. And
Yes.
those human desires are all wired into our senses. And that's all physical. That's the illusion of the physical world. And
Mhm.
that's why it's called the great illusion, the
Yeah.
Maya, or they have a term called Lila, which means the dance of consciousness through the creation world. Like
Mhm.
it's the play of consciousness, right?
Yes.
And so we're in the human Lila, and then we become completely forgetful that the human Leela is all there is. And so
Yeah.
when as everything else opens up, anyone who's got a lot of attachment to this being what it is going to be challenged.
Mhm.
It's going to be that's where you have these cracks and openings, and people don't want to be able to unravel their certainty of what they think reality is. I mean, I think one of the wisest and most open ways to look at the world is not through the lens of certainty. Because remember, as you evolve, your consciousness evolves, so does your understanding
Yes.
about anything.
Yes.
So many people have this dogmatic certainty about what is, instead of this living in this kind of open field of receptivity, of uncertainty, that there is so much more happening. And if you can be open to that and you can meet it in a way without having some kind of preconceived notion of what it is, then you can commune with that in a very innocent, very open and very non-attached way, which gives you an opportunity to really change the way you view reality.
Absolutely.
I mean, again, we didn't
Absolutely.
have a choice,
No.
right? Like, and again, for most people, it's not a choice.
Right.
Who are really in it this way. There's a natural curiosity, I think, in the human condition. I mean,
Hmm.
listen, just in our human planet, we've not explored most of the oceans. I mean, don't even get me started on Antarctica. I
Right.
mean, I don't even, I mean, it's the only, isn't that interesting? That's the only thing that the entire human condition is agreed on is the treaty in Antarctica about who could go there and not go there. It's just very fascinating to me that
Oh, I
that
agree.
we can't agree on
Yeah.
anything, but they can agree on that. That's
Yes.
interesting.
That's
We
it's
can just
kind of
leave that
funny,
there for
actually.
now. We
Yeah.
can just leave that
It's
there, but
it
it's just interesting to me.
yeah.
So there are a lot of things that are going to be kind of popping open over the next. And again, think about all the technology that's revealed all the ancient cultures. Like
Hmm.
there's been scans of the Amazon that are in like these sculpture these entire civilizations that are like had millions of people. So our conception that we're the most evolved and most advanced culture that ever lived here, I think is false.
Oh, I
Quite
agree.
frankly, I think it's completely false.
Completely false and delusional.
Delusion.
You know?
Well, that's that certainty, right? That
Right.
attachment onto that. I
Right.
mean, listen, as a young, having had this opening very young, I had this
Hmm.
hunger to travel all over, and I knew that I had to get out of a small town and explore
Yes.
something else. And I traveled all over the world: Egypt, India, Africa, Europe, all over North America, some places in South America, and wanted to be in the experience of some of these sacred sites. And there is no way we are the most evolved culture that's ever been here.
No way. No way.
There's just no way.
Archaeologists and accidental people, people who are finding stuff by accident, like farmers digging up stuff on their land, and people would go to dig a basement and find out there's this whole city like attached to the bottom of their house. People are finding these things and don't know what to do with them because science went from searching and curiosity to this is what we know. This is
Yes,
what
that
we absolutely know. And so, archaeology is no different. And we're now faced with having to look at what we thought we knew is a very small fraction of what we actually know.
and
And
that challenges that human ego because in the
yes.
psychological world, the human ego wants to be able to manage and keep everything the same because it can
Hmm.
manage it. The ego
Yes.
doesn't. One of the big things about the two things the human condition the ego loves to do is it likes to disguise itself as the voice of divinity,
Hmm.
and it likes to keep everything manageable because it knows how to control and navigate something of known quantity. So when something unknown comes into your field, that challenges that certainty. Well, that's exactly what's happening. But how can we discredit that? How can we
Right.
discredit what's being discovered? If someone was really going to be receptive in terms of an exploration and take all the information from a holistic perspective in mind, you can't
Hmm.
form the version of reality, the certainty that we have about the mundane reality. You would there's no way to look at it from another perspective that there's more going on.
Right. I'm going to add the third thing that the ego does.
Oh,
The
let's
ego convinces us that logic it disguises itself as logic. What,
absolutely the voice of
covering
reason,
fear.
the
Yes, the
voice of
voice of
reason.
reason
Yeah.
that it pretty much just justifies fear.
Yeah. And I always say
Yeah.
to people, they say, how do you know when the egoic voice is running you? And I'm like, well, if you feel fear, and the egoic voice is always about diminishing, it's about doubt, and it's about fear,
Well, and it's
right?
to
So
protect us, right? It needs to
it's a
protect
survival
us.
mechanism.
It's a
It's a
survival
survival.
mechanism.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not wrong. It's not bad.
Right.
But I mean, that's what gets challenged is when these new things get opened up, or somebody's experience that doesn't fit into the box that everyone
Hmm.
is designed in terms of certainty. And I think that more and more, even technology, as things get revealed, it's going to have to open up the way we view our history, who we are as beings, our human evolution,
Or
and the nature
de-evolution, as the
our
case may be.
de-evolution, right?
Yeah.
And the nature of our transcendental reality that's
Hmm.
far beyond this
Right.
corporeal meat suit.
Right. Somehow used car sounds better than meat suit. I don't
Used
know.
car, used car, I'll go with meat suit. I mean,
Okay,
and
so
again,
yeah,
sorry, go
I
ahead.
just want I want to shift directions just a bit.
Sure.
So, how does this translate into the paranormal experiences that I know you've had? I
Yeah.
know I mean I have them every day. It just never stops. Same with you probably.
Yeah.
Um, but how does that affect the number of paranormal experiences we're now hearing about? Is that just media? Is that I mean I think media plays into it.
Yeah. It is a,
It plays into it in a big way. I just had that. I just did it completely. I did a paramystic episode with a paranormal filmmaker. So we had that whole discussion about how media and the paranormal. But how do you think that more people are opening up and experiencing paranormal things and not understanding what they're seeing or feeling or hearing or whatever? It's not always seeing.
I would say to you, I would agree that the doors, the veils are opening.
Hmm.
And whether people like it or not, they're having more and more experiences that they cannot understand, right?
Right.
Beyond the normal and beyond our conventional understanding of science, which, by the way, in ancient traditions was woven into science, right?
Right.
It was a holistic. I think it's forcing us to be more holistic beings and consider alternatives that we never have before. But I absolutely do believe that there is more open, available activity than there ever has been between the realms. And I think that's the nature of the age we're in and the things that are cracking open. And I also think it's the nature of like, it's like a critical mass in the human condition. So I think a
Agreed.
combination
Yeah.
of the human condition, the influence that we have going on, the age that's as the age of evolution that we're in as a
Hmm.
species, I think all of that plays in to far more paranormal beyond the conventional experiences, which in our world is normal,
Right.
right? And we call it paranormal and mystical really just means connection to the divine. But I
Right.
mean, for us, it's normal, but I think it's going to become more normalized because
Yes.
it has to be because people can't ignore it anymore.
I think it already has become more
Yeah,
normalized.
and that's where the media comes in,
Yeah.
right? There, it's
Right.
becoming more and more. Now, is it sensationalized and turned into a kind of an entertainment thing to a degree?
To
But
a degree, yes.
that's part of it. That's part of what needs to be required for it to be for that energy to be kind of in kind of infiltrated into the mundane reality.
Right.
I mean,
Because
just look at
storytelling.
Harry Potter.
Yeah.
Harry Potter was a perfect example of like cracking open this entire way of thinking about another world that lives in parallel with the world that's going on. There was the Muggle world and the magical world, and the two worlds lived parallel together, intersecting in ways that people had not considered. And in some ways, that book was a foundational thing that kind of pierced the idea, hey, there's a whole other world going on.
Hmm.
And it opened it up. But there's been many things that have done that, but that's a very pop culture thing that's opened up the idea of it, right?
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
So I think I agree with you, Christina, 1,000%. For us, it has been normal for most of our life.
Hmm.
Not necessarily normal to what we experienced in the mundane reality, but for us, it's a normal way of functioning. And I do
Right.
believe as a human thing, it actually is a normal way of functioning
It
to be
is.
that open to a greater reality than what you are or what you
Right.
perceive yourself to be.
Right.
So yeah, we are going to see more. I think we're going to see
We
more,
are.
and we're going to see everything. We're going to see the contractive and the lower astral stuff. We're going to see higher dimensional stuff. We're going to see different beings and different influences. This is not
Hmm.
new. This has been
No.
around. This has been talked about for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. In the Mahabharata, the entire celestial realm engaged with the human experience. They kind of saw us as like the way it's written in the Mahabharata, which is very interesting, is that we're entertaining to them. They would
Yeah.
watch the wars and the things going on, and they would be engaging with humans in specifically, individually, culturally, and there were some kingdoms that lived between both realms so that you could access some of the kingdoms in these realms and you can access and you could pass back and forth between them, but you had to have a certain evolved condition to be able to access that road.
Right.
And I think that's what it's offering us. It's
Yes.
offering us that invitation to say, listen, refine, grow, change, shift. You have to. There has to be a level of purification that happens in our minds, bodies, spirits, conditioning in order to be able to be open to receive some of these higher vibrations. Because I know you and I have both talked about this, but some of the vibrational experiences for multidimensional things that we've had happen has profoundly um, flushed up other things that had to leave in order for us to be able to receive the vibrations.
Absolutely.
And I'm being diplomatic
Absolutely.
about the way I'm talking about it, but you know what
Yes,
I'm
yes, yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. And, this is the third time it's come into my head, so I'm being prompted to ask you a question that I'm not sure
saying.
anyone has asked you on a show before. But the question is, have you shapeshifted? Have you physically felt a shapeshift?
You mean in terms of like genetics or like the physical body?
Like the physical body, like turning into, I'll just use myself as an example. There was at one point where I was in this very high frequency, and I literally shapeshifted into an owl. Like people
Okay.
saw it happen. It's not just my imagination. People watched it happen, where I literally turned into an owl for not for very long, but briefly.
I've had a lot of clients say similar things about what they've observed when I'm in the midst of doing ceremonies or actually sessions with them or
Okay.
events where people would say you transformed into something else. Now, what you're talking, I want to talk about it on two levels. One
Mm-hmm.
is that people will see that they may see that multi-dimensional reality as it comes through you, because as an
Mm-hmm.
instrument of being that, and it comes through you, people will perceive things and then they map on what they see based
Right.
on their perceptions, right? But I
Mm-hmm.
also believe in yogically, there is a profound level of purification that happens in the body with certain practices. And I've been around enough yogis, especially in India, who've lived in the
Mm-hmm.
mountains, and they've done ceremonies and they've done practices, yogic practices, where they've literally transformed their body. And I can look at some pictures of me from my past and go, just in terms of purification on a cellular level, things
Yes.
have changed, right?
Yes.
The, in the subtlety, maybe it's not perceived the same way, but I could feel it. I can feel
Mm-hmm.
changes, and I have had experiences, personal mystical experiences of complete transformation into completely different corporeal forms. Now,
Mm-hmm.
that's a hard thing to kind of map
Right.
because that lives in the world of experience, but I don't discredit that. That
Mm-hmm.
all becomes part of the process of me in terms of learning about who I am as a multidimensional being. So my answer to the question is yes, I think people project that on them because they're seeing the energy come through.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel also there is a constant purification for me with yogic practices, fasting, meditation. Things happen after meditation. You look and feel different.
Oh,
You know?
absolutely.
And
Absolutely. And I know people
so,
have said that and I've seen it too because people have filmed it, when I'm trance channeling,
mm,
where my face will change.
yes.
Yeah. Or the
I mean,
size of
because
my
the energy
body
you're
will
bringing through.
change. Or,
Oh, yeah,
yeah.
the energy you're bringing through. And you could
Mm-hmm.
see it with people when you're in that state where you're an instrument and another another energy is coming through you.
Yeah. Yeah.
You could see that there's a complete morphing in the individual when they do that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are again there are people who have it's very overt and it's very subtle in other levels.
Right.
I can only speak from what people say, what they view. I know what I feel when some of that energy is coming through.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, and so this is one of the reasons purification is such a big deal for me, is because to be the best instrument, to be able to harness and bring that into the world, whether I like it or not, that's part of what we're doing as being an
Mm-hmm.
instrument of consciousness. Part of
Right.
the process of that is requires to refine your physical form, because if the physical form can't take it, you're gonna have to purify. I had to go through a
Exactly.
lot of I mean, there's so many things I don't do anymore just because it energetically is the vibrationally does not serve me in terms of what I do. And one of those things, and again, I don't have judgment about it. One of those
Mm-hmm.
things is I'm not a meat eater. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
for me, I just don't eat meat. I grew up, and which is ironic because I grew up as a native hunting and growing, and we had food. But and when I was getting into higher meditative states, I had less and less desire to have the density of flesh in my body as part of the digestive process. There's a purification that happened with me with being like basically a pescatarian or a vegetarian, because I was a raw vegan vegetarian for like 8 years. And that was part of the purification process I was going
Mm-hmm.
through. Now I have fish. a little bit of fish,
Hmm.
but and that's it. Mostly, it serves as a grounding thing. But our like fascination with eating flesh, the way we do it in the world, I don't know. Again, that keeps a certain vibration in the body. Now, that's not for everyone, but for me personally, it doesn't serve me when I'm getting into higher meditative states because I can feel the pull of the intensity and the density of some of the foods. And it's even worse with processed foods, sugar, things like that. And there's alcohol.
Hmm.
Again, I'm not saying it's bad stuff, but I'm saying what it does is it has a vibration. And so
Yes.
in the purification process, some of that stuff I can't do anymore. It's not that
Right.
I don't want to do it. My human condition would be I'd love to do it, but it doesn't feel good. It doesn't serve me, and it's certainly the kickback of what I get after having that, after eating or functioning that way, doesn't feel good.
Right. I'm
So
right there with you with the processed foods, the sugars, it's my body doesn't like it anymore because it
can't do
doesn't
it.
vibrate the same way it used to. So,
No, and that and
yeah.
it's for me it's all vibration, right? Because
Hmm.
when you're vibrating at a certain frequency, you're going to be experiencing like different kinds of realities. And some of it's very hard to be able to sustain or even experience or even have come through you when your body's not purified to a certain level,
Right.
right?
Right.
So
Exactly.
again, some people get upset with me. I'm not saying it as a judgment. I'm saying it as a personal experience for me
Hmm.
because it's different. Everyone's journey is different in the way they engage with that. But for me, it's less and less of stuff that I can do that I used to love or that I would have a seductive relationship with. I can't
Hmm.
have it.
Right.
And that goes with material that I'm consuming, with music, that goes with environments of density. There's certain areas where it's not that I can't handle it, it's that I don't choose to want to have to deal with the impact of it.
Right. It just doesn't feel
And
good anymore. I
it
mean,
doesn't feel
bottom
good.
line, it just doesn't feel good anymore.
Well,
And,
listen, pain is a good motivator. Discomfort
well,
is a
it
good
can be,
motivator.
but, if I already know something's going to cause me pain, I'm not going to expose myself to it because I don't feel the need to experience that, you know? And that's what
And
it really
and
comes down to, right?
yeah, it's not
What
that
are
you
you
can't
choosing to
handle it.
experience?
Exactly. It's not that you
Yes.
can't handle it, it's what you choose to handle it. And I think that's a mark of maturity in
Hmm.
terms of like, I mean, I can handle it, but why should I have to try to do that?
Right.
Right? I mean, that's
Right.
no different than staying in a toxic relationship that you know that you're not in alignment with anymore and you're attached to the idea, but you like it doesn't serve you and you know you need to do it. And just because you can handle it doesn't mean you should.
Right. Right.
So,
Exactly.
I mean, if you think about that in terms of media, like 80% of the media is a bombardment of this kind of like very seductively contractive energy and
Very low
low
vibrate
vibration,
energy, a lot
right?
of violence, a lot of negative, a lot of, yeah.
It's
Make,
unfortunate, but I mean, but again, that's displaying this unconscious shadow that the human experience has to find a way to have a more expansive relationship. We have to own that dark part of our human experience. If you don't own that, and that's real shadow work, when we
hmm.
talked about this before too,
Right.
that real shadow work is getting into that and being
Hmm.
able to really understand what you're capable of and accept that and then be able to work with that and make a different decision.
Yes.
So, I mean, what better way than to bombard an entire species with what it's not dealing with,
Right.
right? It's
Exactly.
good. It's going
Make
to
it
force
appear
us.
normal and people will think it's normal. It's not
And
normal.
it's
Low
not normal.
vibration is not normal.
It's not normal,
That's not normal for our frequency, for our spirit, for our consciousness. That is not normal, but it's been made to look normal so that when you don't engage in it, people think you're the weird one.
right?
Yeah.
So we live in this. I mean, people are saying, "What's your message for this age?" I'm like, everything you thought, reconsider.
Hmm.
Everything that was upside down, maybe turned on its totally on its tail, and that's the cosmic influence of this whole shift of all the planets. Everything is going to be on Earth. The highest vibrational energies are going to be available,
Hmm.
and the lowest vibrational energies are going to be available. Everything is going to make itself available and known in a way that's going to ask and force you to ask questions about what you really align to.
Yeah. I think that's a great place to end this conversation. That's a great statement to end this conversation on. Um, how do people get a hold of you if they want to access your membership site or make an appointment or attend a class? How do they get a hold of you?
They can get a hold of me on my website. It's www.markuskasunich.com. It's pretty easy. And I'm
Okay.
on social media, and there's ways to connect with me through various courses, material, and stuff that I'm doing online and in various areas. I come to the Midwest often. So
Yeah.
as much as I love living in my little vortex of Sedona, I have to emerge out of it sometimes.
I prefer the bubble of my office unless I'm in my car, and then that's another bubble that I'm in. I just want to thank you all so much for listening. And Marcus, thank you for all of the incredible information that you've shared
As
today.
always, I really deeply appreciate being here. I love having these conversations, and I feel
Yeah.
inspired by the fact that you're creating forums for us to talk about these things and kind of open this idea up for people to help them integrate thinking about life and about their consciousness in a new way. So
Yeah.
thank you for even making this available.
Mm. Yeah. Everyone, subscribe, like, share. Share this everywhere because everybody needs this information. Thank you all so much, and I'll see you next time on Paramystic Christina.